He thought the alimony check was his ticket to a life of leisure. He never imagined I was the one who would be cashing in. Life with Mark started like a fairy tale, but let me tell you, the pumpkin carriage broke down real quick. For 15 years Sarah worked my fingers to the bone. By day I was a quiet, unassuming office manager. But by night I was building an empire. I created Sassy Stitches, an online boutique selling the most beautiful custom-made baby clothes you ever did see. It started in our spare room, just a few orders, but soon it was a flood. The money was rolling in, a secret river of cash I kept hidden. Why hidden? Because Mark, my darling husband, had the ambition of a sleepy sloth. He hopped from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, each one failing more spectacularly than the last. He'd lost a chunk of our savings on a revolutionary shrimp farm. He tried to start in the garage. The smell, my dear, the smell. So I got smart. I opened a separate bank account, kept the business in my maiden name, and played the part of the supportive, simple wife. He thought my late nights were just me being a workaholic at my day job. The fool. The breaking point was his 45th birthday. He blew what little money he had on a gold watch, bragging about investing in his image. That same week, I'd secretly closed a deal with a major department store that would triple my income. I came home tired but triumphant to find him on the sofa, surrounded by takeout boxes, watching TV. He didn't even look up. "Sarah, the toilet's making a funny noise. Get someone to look at it tomorrow," was all he said. "No, how was your day?" "Nothing." In that moment I saw the rest of my life. Me hustling and building, and him a permanent lazy fixture on my sofa spending my money. The cage I had built for my own protection now felt like a prison. I knew what I had to do. I had to set him free, right into a trap of his own making. I started planning my exit like a military campaign. I hired a shark of a lawyer, a formidable woman named Brenda who could make a statue cry. I quietly moved the bulk of my business assets into an even more secure trust. And then I played my part. I started talking about how stressed I was at my office job, how I feared budget cuts. I let Mark believe our financial future was precarious. When I finally served him the divorce papers, he was shocked, but then he smirked. That smirk. He thought he'd won the lottery. He'd seen the lifestyle we lived, the nice house, my money, the fancy cars, my money, and he assumed a hefty alimony check was his divine right. He signed the papers with a flourish, already dreaming of his easy life. Oh, you foolish, foolish man. The divorce hearing was a masterpiece. Mark swaggered in, wearing a new suit he'd probably bought on credit. His lawyer presented him as a man who had sacrificed his own career ambitions to support the household. A blatant lie, but one he thought would play well. He demanded spousal support, the house, and a share of my assets. He presented a list of my so-called assets, which was comically short. He listed my salary from my day job and our joint bank account, which had barely enough to cover a nice vacation. My lawyer Brenda stood up. She was cool as a cucumber. "Your Honor," she began, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. "My client has indeed been the primary breadwinner. However, Mr. Evans has significantly overestimated her financial standing." Then came the reveal. Brenda presented the documents. The house was in my name only, purchased with an inheritance I'd received years prior. The cars were leased by my business. And as for my income, she presented my payslips from my day job, which were modest but comfortable. Mark was smirking, thinking this proved his point about needing support. Then Brenda dropped the first bomb. "Your Honor, we have here the full financial records for Sassy Stitches, a sole proprietorship owned entirely by my client, Sarah Evans, under her maiden name." Mark's head whipped around to look at me. His face was a picture of confusion. "Sassy what?" he whispered loudly. Brenda continued, explaining that the business was started and grown entirely during the marriage, but as a separate entity with its own financial records. She then presented the second bomb. A meticulously kept log going back years of every single deposit Mark had made into his failed business ventures, all from our joint account, totaling over $200,000. My client has effectively already provided Mr. Evans with a significant financial settlement, which he squandered. The judge's face was stern. He saw right through Mark. The alimony was set at a paltry $500 a month, A slap in the face to what Mark expected. He didn't get the house. He got nothing but a small lump sum from the dissolution of our meager joint assets. He was left with his clothes, his broken dreams, and a mountain of personal debt he'd accrued. He had built a paper prison for himself and I had just locked the door. The smirk was long gone, replaced by a pale, sweaty panic. The game was on. You'd think the story ends there, wouldn't you? A little justice, a little karma. But Mark was like a bad weed. If you don't pull up the roots, he grows back. A few months after the divorce, I heard through the grapevine my friend Linda, who works at the bank, is a wonderful source of gossip, that Mark was telling everyone how he was going to bounce back. He was going to start a high-end personal concierge service. Can you imagine? The man who couldn't remember to put the bins out was going to be a personal assistant to the rich. This is where my revenge became creative. I couldn't have him hovering around, a failed, bitter man who might try to sue me again. I needed him to be content but far, far away from me. So I created a puppet master. Using a private investigator I'd hired during the divorce, I found out everything about his new business plan. Then I created a digital ghost, a fake investor persona named Arthur Finch. Arthur Finch sent Mark an email, praising his business concept and offering to be a silent partner. Mark, desperate and arrogant, bit the hook like a starving fish. Arthur started wiring him money, my money from an untraceable account, for startup costs. But Arthur was a demanding benefactor. He insisted the business be based in a trendy, but notoriously expensive city 1,000 miles away. He demanded Mark rent a flashy office to attract the right clientele. Mark, thinking he'd finally found his lucky break, obeyed every command. I was pulling the strings and he was dancing. He moved away, pouring every penny Arthur gave him into a business that was doomed from the start. The rent was astronomical, the clients were non-existent, but Mark was living the high life again on my dime. He was posting pictures on social media from fancy restaurants, bragging about his successful investor. He was so busy playing the big shot, he never stopped to wonder why his business wasn't making any actual money. He was my expensive long-distance problem, and he was too blinded by his own ego to see the strings attached to every dollar. For a year, Mark's life was a beautiful, glittering house of cards, and I was the gentle breeze keeping it upright. Arthur Finch would send just enough money to cover the massive overhead, keeping Mark afloat but never allowing him to turn a real profit. My investigator would send me regular reports. Mark was leasing a luxury car, hiring a model/actress as his receptionist, and generally behaving like a billionaire playboy. The $500 a month I was sending him was an insult to him now, a pittance he barely acknowledged. The irony was sweeter than my lemon drizzle cake. But every puppet master knows the show must eventually end. The final act began when Arthur Finch suggested a massive make-or-break venture, hosting an exclusive high society gala to attract the city's elite. It was a terrible idea logistically and financially, which is exactly why I proposed it. Mark, of course, thought it was genius. He spent months planning the apex soiree, renting a ballroom, ordering custom suits, and commissioning ice sculptures. The invoices were astronomical. Arthur covered them all, encouraging Mark to spare no expense. The night of the gala arrived. My investigator was there, posing as a guest. He sent me pictures. Mark looked like the cat that got the cream, schmoozing and laughing, surrounded by people he thought were the creme de la creme. What he didn't know was that half the guest list were actors I'd hired, and the other half were there for the free champagne. At the peak of the evening, just as Mark was about to give a grand speech, the pre-programmed messages started rolling in. First, an email from Arthur Finch to Mark's public account. Regrettable news. My investment portfolio has collapsed. All funding is immediately withdrawn. Effective immediately. Then, a message from the bank, notifying him that the accounts for his business were frozen due to suspicious activity. Then the landlord served him with an eviction notice for the office, right there in the ballroom. The look on his face, my dear, as his phone buzzed and buzzed, was worth every single penny. His world, the world I had so carefully constructed for him, came crashing down in the space of 5 minutes. The house of cards didn't just fall. It was obliterated. The aftermath was a beautiful, quiet symphony of consequences. Mark was ruined. The gala venue sued him for the unpaid balance. The luxury car was repossessed from the ballroom car park. His receptionist left him, and he was left with nothing but the suitcase he brought to the city and a mountain of debt in his business's name. Since I had orchestrated everything through the Arthur Finch entity, which was just a web of shell companies and digital footprints, none of the debt could be traced back to me. He had signed all the contracts himself. He had to crawl back to our hometown, tail between his legs, and move into his elderly mother's spare room. He tried to contest the divorce, claiming fraud, but my lawyer, Brenda, simply presented the evidence that I had been completely transparent about my assets in the initial proceedings. The business was mine, and he had received exactly what the court deemed fair. His new claims were thrown out. Meanwhile, my life was everything I had ever dreamed of. Sassy Stitches went from strength to strength. I sold the old house, the one full of bad memories, and bought a beautiful modern loft apartment. I started a charity, teaching single mothers how to sew and start their own small businesses. My life was full of purpose, joy, and peace. The final twist, the one that really seals the story? About a year later, I was at a charity fundraiser for my new foundation. And who should be there, serving canapés in a waiter's uniform? Mark. Our eyes met across the room. The humiliation on his face was a physical thing. I simply smiled, a gentle, polite smile, and gave a slight, gracious nod. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He was living his consequence and I was living my freedom. He thought he could live off me forever, but in the end he was just a pawn in my game. And let me tell you, my dear, winning that game was the sweetest revenge of all. Now who wants more tea?